Now, what was the other part of your question? Oh, about the tone. About the tone. Well, this is a very specific question, but in the story that's told in The Invisible Landscape, Dennis seemed, as he went around the bend, to have insights into these, like, shamanic techniques that were real techniques, and that he could not only tell you what they were, he could tell you how they worked. And one of the things he insisted upon was that you could use your voice to transduce energy into your own body and other people's bodies, which this is no news. Acoustical signals are a good way to transduce energy across space. But that you could actually use it almost like a acoustical laser or something like that, and that you could interfere with the normal chemistry of these drug molecules and make them enter into bonding situations that they would normally not have affinity for the bond. You do this by making them superconductive. You make them superconductive by stilling their molecular motion. We tend to think of absolute zero as a temperature, but in fact, when an atom is still, from a physicist's point of view, it's at absolute zero. At absolute zero, the normal rules of bonding are canceled, and these things become like sticky. They'll bond to anything. And so he said you could use voice to form a relationship of the geometric incident of the angle of attack of the incoming acoustical wave as it encountered the molecular matrix, that it would cause some of these molecules to become superconducting, and that then they would bond permanently into the bond site of activity, and that instead of having a transient psychedelic trip, you would lock this stuff in. And he envisioned the harmine molecule, which has these two Mickey Mouse-like ears of benzene rings hanging off the pentexyl structure of the center. He visualized them like vibrating antennae. And he said, you will land these molecules into the nuclear cleft of the DNA and then bond them in with this acoustically generated sound, and then forever after, the person that we do this to will have a standing waveform holographic image in their imagination of the sum total of space and time. It was like he said, you'll get this image of the universe that will be sort of like your interface to the big internet. The internet where every star is a website. And the sound that you were to make to cause this to happen was the electrons, an octave, or a harmonic of the electron spin resonance of the harmine molecule in your system. And it is true that that a significant percentage of the people who take ayahuasca report a loud hum. A hum. It was a hum. And so he felt that by imitating these molecular hums and tuning through them, that you only, according to him, you only had to make the right sound for a few milliseconds. So the doing the scales was an effort to hit all possible sounds, knowing that when you got it right for just a few milliseconds, it would lock in. And so these sounds sounded somewhat like this. And then he somehow was able to keep going, and then he would start over and do this, and he called this the strum. And it would not have been worth talking about 32 years later or whatever, except that it seemed to work. It caused him to go spectacularly bananas, and me to go arguably nearly as spectacularly bananas. things. And in a way, that trip we've never come down from. I mean, I'm not saying that as I sit here I am in contact with the eschaton or the spinning violet torus of hyperdimensionally stored holographic information. But on the other hand, I feel a very strange, weird connection to those times, probably because he put all kinds of strange suggestions into my mind. I mean, at one point he said, we can never leave this place. We'll never leave this place. He said, but we have to fashion an image and send it forth. We have to send forth holographic images of ourselves. And I've often wondered, am I still down there, rising at dawn to walk the grassy pasture loaded out of my skull? And, this is all some sort of, it's all a dream, actually. Now, people say, whoa, but that's crazy. How could something like that happen? Well, excuse me, wait a moment. You know what the straight people are selling? They're selling that the universe sprang from nothing, for no reason, instantly. Well, now, I submit to you that this is the limit case for credulity. If you believe that, my family owns a bridge over the Hudson River that we will sell you very, very cheaply. The idea that the universe could spring instantly from nothing for no reason is, they're just saying, test them with this, Charlie. If they'll buy that, what wouldn't they buy, for crying out loud? And this is tenet one of science. Essentially what science is saying is, give us one free miracle. One free miracle, and we can just work with that. We can unfold that, invest that, fold it back, expand it, comment on it, copy it, verify it. So then apparently you get one free miracle when you play this game, the how does it all work game. Well, then I'll take my miracle at the end, thank you. It seems to me that a miracle is far more likely to arise out of a very complex situation, a situation where you have physics and computers and civilizations and superconductivity and planets and stars and oceans and gases and plasmas and da-da-da-da-da-da. A miracle, you might shake a miracle out of such a rich and juicy mix, but to get a miracle out of nothing, this is bizarre.
Yes, I guess this addresses the question, what do you do when it's weird, When the going gets weird, the weird turn pro. Isn't that what Hunter Thompson teaches us? Great psychedelic guru and explorer of altered states. Honing yourself, I think, is basically the ability to keep your mouth shut and sit still, It's just about hanging on when it gets peculiar. And it really doesn't ever get too peculiar if you know a few things. One thing is that mantras work in that state. They may not work in any other state. That's debatable. But in that state, they're just as advertised, Another thing is that cannabis is truly the gift of the Lord in that situation, because it just, your little motor comes on and you wheel away from whatever it is that's troubling you. It is weird. It is weird because you're penetrating a very bizarre dimension. I had an experience earlier this summer, which I probably shouldn't tell, but I will, that is an example of how it gets weird. A friend of mine moved to London and left me his library for unspecified amounts of time to keep. A very bizarre library, mostly Platonic stuff, a lot of magic, a lot of that sort of thing. And so we built a book loft for it, and our house is wedge-shaped, and so this book loft is way up at the top of the house. And I was alone in the house, and I took 7 dried grams, and I was sitting there, and it was just beginning to come on. I was in the show what you know thing phase, and it was beginning to show what it knew, and there was this disrupted area of space in front of me where it was like rotating, and I was looking into it and talking it up. And I was actually speaking. At first I was just speaking in my mind. Then I began speaking aloud, and I was saying, "You are beautiful thing. You are beautiful." And suddenly things changed, and it became very cold, and meaning the temperature fell suddenly. And the dog next door, who never howls, howled. And the cat, which was down below me, I was up in this loft looking down at our bed, the cat was on the bed. The cat flared out and made this really weird noise, and I just, I stopped what I was doing and projected my mind into this situation. And at that moment I heard this sound, which was like, and then something settled onto the roof, sufficient to make the 6 by 14-inch beam creak in. Just went, and I was floored. And I just sat for a minute, and I was not frightened. In fact, my emotion was hard to get back to, but I wasn't frightened. But just at that moment, this thing was really coming on, and really visually peculiar, and it seemed like the two things were independent. The trip was getting stronger and stronger, but a 10-ton something had landed on the roof beam of my house. So I just sat with it for about 30 seconds, and then this thought or voice came, and it was, this thing has come because of something I'm doing, and that means that I can get rid of it. So I just turned like this up toward the roof and projected this thought very strongly, which was, "Begone, I am in conversation with an elder." And this thing went, "Woo!" And there was a long pause, 10 seconds or so, and then whatever it was, it lifted off the roof and went away. And what was weird about this was I had never ever used in my own mind this phrase, "an elder," to describe the mushroom. It was like just came out of me. And the whole episode seemed real weird to me. And I just let it ride. But that's an instance where, there is this, let's call it synchronicity, so that we don't have to believe that a pterodactyl landed on my roof. There is this synchronicity. For some reason, there chose to be a fluttering sound, and the beam chose to creak. Now, doubtless, this has to do with temperature and the cooling of day to night and this and that. But, it was a thing to go through. And other things like that go on. There was an incident which I don't think is actually on True Hallucinations in Hawaii, where we stepped out of the house. It was we were hitting it pretty hard in that Hawaiian situation, and stepped out of the house in the middle of the night. Totally clear, starry sky, very high, thin cirrus clouds in one part of the sky, and 300 yards in front of the house and about 300 feet up in the air, a large black cloud, lenticular, slowly turning. So, it's ridiculous. And you just look at this thing, and it swirled faster and faster and grew denser and denser, and then it just retreated into nothing. It both moved away and got so small it disappeared. So what is this? Low-level convection because of... There's no explaining these things. Many people on psilocybin report the rustling at the side of the room. There seems to be a periphery about 15 feet out where the scurriers are in action. And they just move around, and they never come closer, and they never get further away, and they just scurry and scurry. You say, oh, there are rats, and gee, there are a lot of rats. And, yes, more, any notion? You, yes.
I think we've all listened to True Hallucinations with a great deal of interest, but I personally had trouble understanding your description of Dennis's description of the experiment of La Chirette, what was actually occurring with what the intercalation of the harmine molecule into the DNA matrix. Can you explain that?
Do you mean you had trouble with the concepts or the operational? What did we do? You mean you want to know how to do it?
Well, could you go through that again rather briefly, perhaps?
Okay, I think, but you don't have a manuscript. In the manuscript, there actually comes a place where there are 10 things that must be happening. It's basically the notion that if you saturate your body with beta-carbolines, and then that you can actually make a sound with your mouth that is a overtonal harmonic of the electron spin resonance of the harmine molecule. Now, we have been subject to endless amounts of vilification and some jeering because of this idea. So let me try and make it seem as credible as possible to you. First of all, when you take something like ayahuasca, hundreds of millions of these molecules flood your body and occupy the bond site wherever it may be. Okay, so then this sound which you generate with this ESR overtonal harmonic, it need only come in contact with a very small population of these molecules. Most of these molecules will be wrongly oriented to the source of the sound, and it will have no effect. But some few, perhaps dozens only, will be in the correct orientation to undergo this process of cancellation of molecular motion, which is, at the one molecule level, an operational definition of superconductivity. See, if you have one molecule, you can have superconductivity, and you really can't speak of a low temperature phenomenon, because how do you have low temperature when you have one molecule? So the notion was then that when this molecule achieves this superconducting state by being audially canceled, that it will bond to anything near it. And some of these will bond into nuclear DNA in neurons. And then there was a whole long period spent figuring out how could, since the synapse of a neuron is far away from the nuclear body, how could these drug compounds, which are active at the synapse, be transported into the region of the nucleus? And then, fortunately, Arnie Mandel and some other people came along with what they called axioplasmic transport, and they proved with radioactive labeling that there was both movement to and from the synapse to the nuclear membrane. So then that was the method of conveyance. And then the whole idea was that, I'm sure you know how DNA is organized in this ladder-like fashion. Well, there is space between nucleotides for a planar molecule like beta-carboline to slide right in there. And it will not disrupt the molecule at all. LSD does this too. This is not wild-eyed stuff. This is well understood. And in fact, early in the 50s, LSD was looked at as a possible radiation protection that it was felt that your body could withstand a higher amount of radiation with LSD. And the reason is very easy to understand. Simply that the planar molecule of LSD was inserting between the nucleotides and adding its physical strength to the strength of the molecule. And this is a typical strategy for strengthening molecules, to add intercalators. But our idea was that the beta-carboline molecule is basically a pentexyl group with two benzene rings hanging off it like Mickey Mouse ears. And the idea was that these were ideal transducers for a waveform. In other words, that they would emit a signal, that any kind of microwave or any kind of thermal radiation, anything that was being transduced through the DNA would be radiated off by these harmine molecules. And that seemed to actually happen, And we felt that the basis of our experience was the reason we were able to access what's called the unconscious for such a long period of time was because these molecules were operating. Once they intercalate, there's no reason for them to...
And so suddenly then, you have a morality, you have an ethical arrow, you have contextualization in the processes of nature, you have meaning, you have authenticity, you have hope. You have the cancellation of existentialism and positivism and all that late 20th century crapola that people used to entertain back in the old days. So that's why I am so keen for the idea of novelty, because it seems self-evident. And, we can argue about whether the eschaton will arrive in 2000 or 2012 or 3000. But I cannot believe that there is anybody in this room tonight who that the hardest thing to imagine is human history going on for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of more years. That's impossible. We see around us the processes that make of history a self-limited game. The clock's ticking, folks. You think we can do gene splicing and internet and psychedelic drugs and manipulation of our genetic material and star flight and atom antimatter and quantum teleportation and all these things? You can extrapolate that 500 years into the future? Don't be ridiculous. No, history is some kind of a phase transition. It only lasts about 25,000 years. Some people think that's a long time. Some people think it's a short time. It depends on where you stand. I think of it as snap. One moment you're hunting ungulates on the plains of Africa, and the next moment you're hurling a gold ytterbium superconducting extrastellar device toward Alpha Centauri with all of mankind aboard in virtual space being run as a simulation in circuitry. It's just first the one thing, then the other thing. But now history, which lasts 25,000 years, is this weird period where you're neither fish nor fowl. You're not the hunting ape anymore, but you are not yet the 16-dimensional digital god, And in that transition phase, there is confusion, there is angst. But now we're at the end. We have I maintain anybody who's peddling angst and peddling pessimism and peddling all this stuff is just, that's so 2 minutes ago.